And now Israel is bracing for severe weather as
Rising line, we destroyed missiles, and we destroyed a lot of the
For thousands of years, Jerusalem has held secrets beneath its stones, sealed gates, hidden chambers, buried warnings. But in the last few weeks, something shifted. The ground cracked open, strange lights appeared in the sky, and an ancient sound, one that has no modern explanation, echoed across the city. Some are calling it geology, some are calling it prophecy, but nobody is calling it ordinary. And here is what nobody is talking about. The events did not happen one at a time. They happened together, all at once, in the same city, in the same season. And the pattern they form is impossible to ignore. It started without warning. No storm, no rain, no flood alert. The sky above Jerusalem was clear. The ground was dry. The sun was doing what it always does over that ancient city. And then something came up from below. Not water, not ordinary mud, something darker, something thicker, something that moved in a way that did not match anything the people standing there had seen before. Near one of the most historically significant valleys in the entire biblical world, a stream of thick black material pushed up through a narrow crack in the earth. It did not trickle. It surged. It foamed at the edges. It bubbled from the center. And it spread slowly across the dry ground like a shadow that had nowhere else to go. People stopped walking. People stopped talking. Phones came out. Eyes went wide. And the first question on everyone's lips was the same. Where is this coming from? Now here is where it gets interesting. That valley has a name, and the name matters. It is called the Valley of Hinnom. In the Bible, this place is not just geography. It carries the weight of some of the darkest warnings ever written in Scripture. The prophet Jeremiah stood in this valley and delivered a message of judgment. He described a people who had turned away from God. He described consequences that were coming, whether the people believed it or not. And he described it in a place called Hinnom. So when thick black water begins rising from dry ground in that exact location, without rain, without storm, without any obvious cause, people notice. Scientists would point to underground pressure, trapped mineral water, temperature changes forcing material upward through cracks in old limestone. These are real possibilities. They should not be dismissed. But here is what science cannot fully explain: the timing. Because this was not the only thing happening in Jerusalem that week, not even close. While people were still standing at the edge of that dark stream, trying to make sense of what they were seeing, something else was being reported less than a mile away, underground. And what was found there would raise an entirely different set of questions. Questions that archaeologists are still struggling to answer. But before getting there, consider this. Throughout the Bible, dark water rising from the earth is not a neutral image. In the book of Jeremiah, the earth itself becomes a messenger. The land responds to what is happening on its surface. The ground does not stay silent when something above it has gone wrong. Most people who walked past that valley that morning had no idea what was happening beneath their feet. They were going about their day, buying groceries, driving to work, picking up their children. That is exactly what makes this so unsettling. Not that something dramatic happened in a dramatic place, but that life continued completely normally, while the ground beneath that life was already moving, already shifting, already pushing something hidden toward the surface. And that raises a question that has nothing to do with geology. What else is still hidden? What else is being held beneath the surface of things that look perfectly normal from the outside? Because Jerusalem is not the only place where that question applies. Nations look stable until they are not. Families look fine until something breaks open. And people carry things beneath the surface for years, sometimes decades, before the pressure becomes too great. The Valley of Hinnom did not create the darkness that came out of it. It just revealed what was already there. And that detail, more than any scientific explanation, is what stopped people cold that morning. Not the mud, the meaning. But what came next moved the story from the ground to beneath it. And what was found underground near Jerusalem in the days that followed has not been fully explained by anyone, not the scientists, not the historians, and not the theologians, because what was uncovered did not fit neatly into any single category. It was old, it was sealed, and it appeared to have been placed there on purpose. Stay with this. There is something about a sealed door that changes a person. It does not matter how old the door is. It does not matter how deep underground it sits. The moment someone realizes that something was deliberately hidden, the mind goes to the same place every time. What did someone not want found, and why? Near the old city of Jerusalem, in the days following the strange event at the valley, workers and researchers reported coming across something unexpected during routine groundwork. A hollow space beneath layers of compacted earth and stone. Not a natural cavity, not a collapsed tunnel, a room, deliberately constructed, deliberately sealed, and inside that room, objects that had not seen light in what appeared to be a very long time. Reports described a large stone surface at the center of the chamber, flat, worn by age, but shaped with clear intention. Around it, the walls showed darkened patches, long vertical stains that many believed came from oil lamps or candles burned over many years. And near the stone surface, fragments, small pieces of material that resembled parchment, darkened by time but still holding their shape. This was not a storage room forgotten by accident. Everything about the space suggested that people had gathered there, deliberately, repeatedly, and then at some point, the room was closed, sealed from the outside, and left. Now, archaeologists are careful people. They are trained to resist dramatic conclusions. And rightly so. Not every underground chamber near Jerusalem is connected to something prophetic. The city has been built, destroyed, and rebuilt so many times across so many centuries that hidden rooms are not rare. What is rare is the condition. When a chamber is sealed this carefully, when objects inside remain intact without disturbance, it usually means one of two things. Either the people who sealed it believed the contents needed to be preserved, or they believed the contents needed to be hidden. Both possibilities raise the same question. From what? Nearby, in a separate location, another discovery was reported. A clay jar, ancient in appearance, sealed with a horizontal bar across the top, the kind of closure that was used in biblical times to protect contents from air and moisture. When carefully opened, small objects were found inside, fragments of what appeared to be written material, and beneath those fragments, a few small items that appeared to be of value, coins, ornamental pieces darkened with age. The combination of written material and valuables together inside a sealed container is not an accident. In ancient practice, important documents were often stored alongside items of value to signal their significance. Someone wanted whatever was inside that jar to be taken seriously. Someone wanted it to last. The book of Daniel contains a phrase that many readers have passed over without fully absorbing its weight. It speaks of words being sealed until a specific time, not hidden randomly, not lost by accident, sealed, with intention, for a moment that had not yet arrived. Whether or not that connection applies literally to what was found near Jerusalem, the image it creates is powerful, that some things are not meant to be found early, that certain discoveries carry a timing all their own, that what is sealed is not gone, it is waiting. But the underground chambers and sealed jars were not the most disturbing discovery of that period. That came from a narrow crevice in the rocky slope nearby. Workers reported coming across a small natural cavity that had been partially concealed by displaced stone. Inside, a human form, ancient, preserved by the dry conditions of the rock, positioned with the hands raised toward the face. And near the body, on the stone surface closest to it, a single word had been carved. One word, judgment. No name, no date, no explanation, just that word, in a position that made it impossible to miss. For those who found it, the silence that followed was described as total, because in that moment, the past and the present collapsed into the same space. There is a verse in the book of Hebrews that says, "Each person is appointed to die once, and after that comes judgment." It is one of the plainest statements in all of Scripture, not poetic, not symbolic, just a fact presented without decoration. And suddenly, in a cave near Jerusalem, that fact had a face, or rather, it had a body, positioned, preserved, with the word carved into stone beside it, as if whoever placed it there wanted to make absolutely certain the message survived, even if the messenger did not. Now some will read this and say, it is simply an ancient burial, a historical artifact, a remnant of a culture that expressed things differently than modern people do. That is a fair and reasonable position. But consider what was happening above ground at the same time. The dark water rising from the dry valley, the sealed chamber with its burned walls and ancient fragments, the clay jar with its written contents and hidden valuables, and now this. Each one, on its own, is explainable. Together, they form something harder to dismiss, a pattern. And in Jerusalem, patterns have a way of meaning more than they appear to. But here is what nobody had accounted for yet. While attention was focused on what was happening beneath the city, something entirely different was beginning above it, in the sky. The first report came from the eastern side of the city, near a wall that has been sealed for over 500 years. A wall that, according to one of the most specific prophecies in the entire Old Testament, is connected to an event that has not happened yet. And around that wall, in the days that followed, something changed. Something that the stones themselves seemed to register before the people did. Light appeared first. Not a flash, not lightning, not a beam from a passing aircraft. Something steadier than that. Witnesses on the eastern side of Jerusalem described a concentrated brightness appearing above the Temple Mount area. It held its position in the sky for what some described as several seconds. Then it was gone. No trail, no sound, no gradual fade. There one moment, gone the next. Within hours, the reports multiplied. People in different parts of the city described seeing the same thing from different angles. A focused light, stationary, silent, then absent. Now, unusual lights over cities are not automatically supernatural events. Atmospheric conditions can create optical effects. Reflections from buildings, aircraft, drones, even weather balloons have been misidentified before. These explanations are worth considering seriously. But the reports from Jerusalem that night carried one detail that made the atmospheric explanation harder to apply. Multiple witnesses, in different locations, described not just the light itself, but what appeared to be within it. Forms, upright, luminous, moving with a kind of fluid motion that did not match any known aircraft or drone, not sharp or mechanical, smooth, deliberate, and then gone. No verified footage confirmed the event. No radar or sensor data has been released publicly. What remains is a collection of human testimonies that share the same core description. Something was seen, something that did not behave like anything familiar. And whatever it was, it appeared directly above one of the most contested pieces of land on the surface of the earth. That location is not incidental. Throughout Scripture, the presence of angels is rarely random. They appear in specific places at specific moments. Near the tomb, at the gate of the city, above the ark, at the threshold of significant events. Whether what was seen above Jerusalem was a natural phenomenon or something else entirely, the location forces the question, why there? Why that spot? Why that night? But the light was only the beginning, because 2 days later, the sound came. It did not arrive with warning. There was no build-up, no distant rumble that gradually grew louder. It simply appeared, a low, sustained tone that moved across the city in a way that witnesses struggled to describe. Not mechanical, not explosive, not the kind of sound that modern ears recognize from daily life. Deep, resonant, structured. Several people independently used the same word to describe it: trumpet. Not a modern brass instrument, not a military signal horn. Something older than that. Something that seemed to come from a direction that nobody could agree on. Some said it came from the east. Others said it seemed to rise from beneath the ground itself. And then it was gone. Official channels offered no explanation. No military exercises were confirmed in the area that night. No industrial source was identified. The sound arrived. It lasted. And it left, leaving behind something louder than itself: silence. And in that silence, a passage from the book of 1 Corinthians surfaced in the minds of many who heard it. The trumpet shall sound. 4 words that appear in the context of one of the most significant moments described in all of New Testament Scripture. The moment of transformation. The moment when what has been hidden is revealed. The moment when what is mortal gives way to what is not. The trumpet, in biblical imagery, does not announce something ordinary. It announces a change in the order of things. Now, was this sound that heard over Jerusalem that night a fulfillment of that prophecy? No one can say that with certainty, but nobody could say with certainty what the sound was either. And in that gap, between what is known and what is not, something grows. Something that feels less like curiosity and more like preparation. But the light and the sound were still not the most dramatic sky event reported during this period. That came from the cliffs above the Dead Sea. In one of the most ancient and haunting landscapes in the world, witnesses described something bursting from within the rock face itself. Not a brush fire spreading across dry grass. Not a controlled burn. Something that appeared to originate from inside the cliff. As if heat and pressure had been building in secret for a long time, and had finally found a way out. Orange, red, surrounded by thick white smoke that rose in columns above the dark stone. The Dead Sea region is geologically active. The ground beneath it sits along one of the most significant fault systems in the Middle East. Mineral reactions, geothermal pressure, and trapped gases can create fire-like events in certain rock formations. These are documented phenomena. But the location carries a weight that geology alone cannot carry. The land surrounding the Dead Sea is connected, in historical and biblical memory, to one of the most dramatic acts of judgment recorded in ancient scripture: fire, from above, on cities that had refused every warning given to them. Genesis describes it plainly, and now fire was rising again from that same region. Not from above this time, from within. As if the earth itself had remembered something, and was saying so. But even as the smoke rose above the Dead Sea, and the sound faded over Jerusalem, another location was beginning to draw attention, a location that had been silent for over 500 years, a gate that had not opened since the 16th century, a gate that, according to one of the most precise prophecies in the book of Ezekiel, is connected to an event that has not happened yet. And around that gate, in those same days, something was beginning to change. Something subtle. Something that the stones registered before the people did. There is a gate on the eastern wall of Jerusalem that has not opened in over 500 years. It faces the Mount of Olives directly. It is built from ancient stone. It is sealed from the inside. And it has remained that way since 1541, when an Ottoman ruler ordered it closed permanently. His name was Suleiman the Magnificent, and the reason he sealed it was not structural. It was not because the gate was damaged. It was not because the road outside had changed. He sealed it because of a prophecy. Specifically, a prophecy that said a great king would one day enter Jerusalem through that gate. Suleiman feared what that king's arrival might mean for his own rule. So he did what rulers do when they cannot stop a prophecy. He tried to delay it. He sealed the gate. He built a cemetery directly in front of it, believing that a holy king would not pass through a burial ground. And for over 5 centuries, the gate has remained exactly as he left it, closed, sealed, silent. It is called the Golden Gate. And in the book of Ezekiel, chapter 44, there is a verse that has attached itself to this location for thousands of years. It says, "The gate shall be shut, "It shall not be opened, because the Lord, the God of Israel, has entered by it." That verse does not describe the gate opening. It describes why it stays closed. And that detail has fascinated scholars, theologians, and prophecy watchers for generations. Because if the gate stays shut until the Lord enters by it, then the question is not when it will open. The question is, what will cause it to open? And in the days that followed the light, the sound, and the fire near the Dead Sea, reports began to surface about the Golden Gate itself. Not dramatic reports, not stories of the gate swinging wide open, something quieter than that, and in some ways, more unsettling. Witnesses near the eastern wall described a faint glow appearing between the ancient stones of the gate. Not a floodlight, not a reflection from nearby buildings. Something softer than that, almost like light, pressing through from the other side of something sealed. Others described sounds near the base of the wall, low, rhythmic, like something beneath the stone was shifting its position. And then the detail that drew the most attention: thin cracks, new ones, running along specific sections of the gate's stonework, hairline fractures in places that had shown no previous damage, and fine dust falling from the surface even when the air around it was completely still. Now, ancient stone develops cracks. This is not unusual. Jerusalem's geology is active. Underground water movement, temperature changes, and seismic microactivity can all create new fractures in old walls. These explanations are valid, but here is what made this specific set of cracks different from routine stone aging: their direction. Several observers noted that the cracks appeared to run along lines that, when traced, pointed toward the sealed entrance of the gate itself, as if the pressure was coming from somewhere specific, as if something inside or beneath the gate was pressing outward. In 1969, during a period of heavy rain near the eastern wall, an archaeologist named James Fleming was working near the base of the Golden Gate when erosion briefly exposed something no one had documented before: a structure beneath the visible gate, older than the one that stands today, built from stone that predated the current wall by what appeared to be centuries. A gate beneath the gate, hidden under layers of stone and centuries of rebuilding, photographed briefly before the ground closed over it again. For archaeologists, this was evidence of Jerusalem's layered history. The city has been destroyed and rebuilt so many times that older structures routinely exist beneath visible ones. But for those watching the Golden Gate through the lens of prophecy, the discovery changed the question. It was no longer simply about when the visible gate might open. It was about what still existed beneath it, what was buried under the sealed entrance. What history had placed beneath the threshold of a gate that has been waiting for 5 centuries? And that question became even heavier when reports surfaced about what subsurface scanning equipment had detected beneath the Temple Mount area during the same general period. Hollow space, larger than expected, structured in a way that did not match natural rock formation. A room, or series of rooms, that appeared to have been deliberately constructed and then sealed from above. Access to the area was restricted quickly. Official statements were brief and focused on structural preservation, but the readings had already been discussed. Word had spread, and with it came a question that has followed Jerusalem for 3,000 years. Is the Ark of the Covenant still beneath the city? Most historians treat this as legend. The Ark disappeared from biblical records during a period of great national upheaval, and its location has never been confirmed by any archaeological discovery. But the Book of Revelation contains an image that has stayed with readers across centuries, a moment when the temple of God in heaven is opened, and within it, the Ark is seen. Whether that image is literal or symbolic has been debated for 2,000 years. What is not debatable is this: the Ark, in Scripture, represents the presence of God among His people, and the question of where that presence rests, and when it will be fully revealed, is not a historical question. It is a present one. Because if Jerusalem is shifting above ground and below it, if gates that have been sealed for centuries are showing signs of pressure, If ancient objects are being uncovered in sealed rooms beneath the oldest city on earth, then the question is not what happened in the past. The question is what is being prepared for right now. And that question leads somewhere most people are not ready to go. At some point, looking at individual events stops being enough. Because individual events can always be explained individually. A crack in a wall is just a crack. A sound in the sky is just a sound. A discovery underground is just archaeology. But when you step back and look at all of it together, something different comes into view. A shape. And that shape matches something that was written down a very long time ago. The Bible does not describe the end of this age as a single sudden event that arrives without warning. It describes a build-up, a season, a series of connected signs that, when seen together, form a picture that was painted long before the events themselves began. Jesus was asked directly by his closest followers, "What will be the sign that these things are coming?" His answer was not one sign. It was a list. Wars, conflicts between nations, earthquakes in many places, famines, disease, unusual events in the sky, division within families, persecution of those who follow him, and a level of global pressure so intense that he described it as something the world had never seen before and would never see again at that level. He called it the beginning of birth pains. That phrase matters, because birth pains do not announce themselves with a single sharp moment. They build, they increase in frequency, they grow closer together over time, and anyone who has witnessed a birth knows what that increasing rhythm means. Something is coming that cannot be stopped. Now look at the world in the year this is being recorded. Nation rising against nation. That is not a metaphor. It is a daily headline. Earthquakes registering across multiple continents within the same month. Food supply pressures affecting populations on every inhabited continent. Disease patterns that shifted the entire structure of global society within a matter of weeks just a few years ago. And in Jerusalem specifically, events that do not fit neatly into any single category. The pattern that Jesus described is not something that has to be forced onto current events. It fits the way a key fits a lock. But there is something in the prophetic timeline that goes beyond general signs. Something specific to Jerusalem. Jesus said this, "When you see Jerusalem surrounded, know that its desolation is near." He was speaking to people who lived in the 1st century, and in 70 AD, Roman armies surrounded and destroyed the city in a way that fulfilled those words with devastating accuracy. But prophecy scholars across many traditions have noted that some biblical prophecies carry what is called dual fulfillment, a near event that partially fulfills the words, and a future event that fulfills them completely. The destruction of Jerusalem in 70 AD was real, it was horrific, and it matched the warning. But the language of those prophecies extends beyond what happened in the 1st century. The book of Daniel speaks of a time of distress unlike anything that has happened before it. The book of Revelation describes a period when pressure falls on the entire inhabited world. Not one city, not one nation, the world. And at the center of it all, through both Daniel and Revelation, stands Jerusalem, not as a bystander, as the focal point, the city around which the final movements of human history are described as gathering. Now here is where this stops being abstract, because there is a specific detail in the prophetic record that connects directly to what is being reported in Jerusalem right now. The book of Zechariah, chapter 14, describes a moment when the Mount of Olives splits, not cracks, not fractures, splits, from east to west, creating a valley where a mountain currently stands. Geologists who have studied the fault system beneath Jerusalem have noted for years that the geology of the Mount of Olives is consistent with the kind of seismic event that could produce exactly that kind of division. The fault runs in an east to west direction. The mountain sits directly above it. And in the same passage, Zechariah describes the Lord himself standing on that mountain when the event occurs. This is not a passage about judgment alone. It is a passage about arrival. And the Golden Gate faces the Mount of Olives directly. The sealed entrance and the prophesied arrival point sit across from each other like two parts of a sentence, waiting for the word that connects them. The book of Ezekiel says, "The gate shall remain shut, because the Lord entered by it." Zechariah says he will stand on the mountain that faces it. Two prophets, separated by decades, describing the same location from different angles. And right now, that location is producing reports of cracks, sounds, lights, and underground movement that nobody has fully explained. This is the moment where the honest thing to say is this: no one knows the day or the hour. Jesus said that directly. He said even he, in his earthly form, did not know the specific timing. Only the Father knew. So this is not a video that is setting a date. It is not claiming that the end begins next Tuesday. What it is doing is something the Bible itself commands its readers to do. Watch, be aware, recognize the season, even when you cannot know the hour. There is a difference between a person who sees storm clouds gathering and panics, and a person who sees storm clouds gathering and calmly prepares. The Bible does not call its readers to panic. It calls them to readiness. And readiness looks like specific things. It looks like examining what a person actually believes, not what they grew up being told to believe, not what is comfortable or convenient, but what they genuinely trust when nothing else is certain. It looks like the relationships in a person's life. Are they carrying something that needs to be resolved? Is there someone they have not spoken to in years who needs to hear from them before time runs out? It looks like the daily decisions that shape a life. What a person gives their time to, what they worry about, what they hope for. Because if the signs being reported in Jerusalem are even partially connected to what Scripture describes as the final season of this age, then the most important response is not to debate geology. It is to prepare the only thing a person can take with them beyond this life, their soul. And the good news, the actual good news, is that preparation is still possible. The door is still open. The invitation is still standing. For now. But there is a pattern in Scripture that is easy to miss until it is too late. The door does not stay open indefinitely. In the account of Noah, the ark was prepared, the warning was given, and then at a specific moment, the door closed. Not gradually, not with a long warning period. It closed. And what happened next happened whether people were ready or not. The same pattern appears in the account of the 10 young women waiting for the bridegroom. Some were prepared, some were not. And when the moment came, it did not wait for those who were not ready to become ready. The door closed. And now, outside Jerusalem, something is pressing against another door, a sealed gate that has not moved in 5 centuries. And the pressure, according to those who have been watching closely, is coming from the inside. Here is what makes Jerusalem different from every other city on earth. It is not the architecture, it is not the tourism, it is not even the history, though the history alone is staggering. What makes Jerusalem different is that it was named specifically, by multiple writers, across multiple centuries, as the place where the final chapter of human history would center. That is an extraordinary claim. But it becomes even more extraordinary when you look at what is happening everywhere else. Because Jerusalem is not the only place where the ground is moving. It is just the place where the movement has the most direct prophetic address. In the past several years, seismic activity has been recorded across regions that historically experience very little earthquake activity. Areas that rarely make the news for geological reasons, suddenly appearing on maps of active seismic zones. Scientists explain this through the natural movement of tectonic plates. The Earth's crust is always in motion. Pressure builds along fault lines over decades and centuries, and then releases. This is normal geological behavior. But the frequency of significant events has drawn attention even within scientific communities. Not because any single earthquake is unexplainable, but because the clustering of events across different continents within compressed time windows is statistically notable. This is not an apocalyptic claim. This is a data observation. The data is showing something that scientists themselves are working to understand. And the Bible, written thousands of years before seismographs existed, described this exact pattern as one of the markers of a specific season in human history. Earthquakes, in one place after another. Not one earthquake, many, in different locations, building towards something. But geological activity is only one thread of the global pattern. The conflict thread is equally striking. At the time this is being recorded, active armed conflicts are occurring simultaneously across multiple regions of the world. Not historical conflicts, not ongoing disputes that have simmered for decades without escalation. New escalations, new fronts, new alliances forming between nations that previously had very different relationships. The geopolitical map of the world is being redrawn in real time, and the speed of that redrawing is unlike anything seen in the post-World War II era. Nations that were stable a decade ago are now fractured. Alliances that seemed permanent have shifted. And at the center of many of these geopolitical tensions sits the Middle East. Specifically, the land surrounding Jerusalem. This is not a political commentary. Different people will draw different conclusions about who is right and who is wrong in any given conflict. But the geography is not a matter of opinion. The land that Scripture identified as the focal point of the final conflict is the same land that sits at the center of the most active geopolitical tensions on Earth right now. That is either an extraordinary coincidence, or it is not a coincidence at all. Then there is the economic thread. Across the globe, the cost of basic necessities has risen in ways that have affected ordinary households, in ways they have not experienced in their lifetimes. Food, housing, energy. The things people need simply to live are becoming harder to access for a growing percentage of the global population. This is described plainly in the book of Revelation, in imagery that, when translated out of its symbolic language, describes a world where basic goods become scarce, and where economic systems are used as instruments of control. Again, historians and economists will offer explanations. Supply chains, monetary policy, population growth, climate pressures. These are real factors, but they are also the mechanisms through which the conditions described in ancient prophecy are arriving. The Bible does not say the end will come through supernatural disruption alone. It describes it arriving through the ordinary systems of human civilization pushed to their breaking point, which means it can look completely normal right up until it does not. And that is the most important thing to understand about this entire global pattern. It does not look like the end of the world in the way movies have trained people to expect. There is no single dramatic moment where everyone agrees something irreversible has just happened. Instead, it looks like a world that is slowly becoming more unstable. A world where each individual crisis seems manageable on its own, but where the combination of crises, the stacking of pressures across economic, political, environmental, and military systems simultaneously creates a weight that the existing structure of civilization was not designed to carry indefinitely. Jerusalem is the focal point, but the pressure is global, and the people feeling that pressure most directly are not usually the people debating prophecy in academic settings. They are ordinary families, ordinary individuals, people in their 50s and 60s and 70s who built their lives around assumptions of stability that are no longer holding the way they once did. People who looked at the world they grew up in and the world their children are inheriting and felt, somewhere in the back of their minds, that something fundamental has changed. They are not wrong. Something has changed. The question is whether that change is random, or whether it is moving towards something, because there is one more element of the global pattern that has not been mentioned yet, and it may be the most personally significant one. Across traditions, across nations, across cultures that do not share a common language or religious background, something is being reported with increasing frequency. Dreams. Vivid, structured, emotionally powerful dreams that people describe as unlike anything they have experienced before. Many describe images of Jerusalem, of a gate, of light, of a figure in white, of a voice saying a single word, open. Now dreams can be psychological. They can be the product of the images and conversations a person has absorbed during waking hours. But the volume of these reports, and the similarity of the imagery across people who have no connection to each other, has become difficult to ignore. Something is pressing on the human spirit in a way that is surfacing even in sleep, even in the places people go to escape the noise of the world. And that pressure, that sense that something is coming that cannot be avoided or delayed, is not producing despair in the people who report it. It is producing something unexpected, urgency, not panic, urgency, the kind that makes a person stop and look seriously at the things they have been putting off, the conversations they have not had, the choices they have not made, the questions they have not been willing to sit with. And that urgency is pointing in one direction, the same direction it has pointed for 2,000 years, toward a decision that every person living on Earth right now will eventually have to make. Not about politics, not about prophecy timelines, about what they believe, about who they trust, about where they will stand when the door finally closes. Everything covered so far has been building toward this, not toward fear, toward a choice, because that is ultimately what every sign, every sealed gate, every crack in ancient stone, every sound in the night sky is pointing toward. Not information, a decision. The Bible is full of moments where warning came before consequence. Noah did not experience the flood without first receiving a warning and a way of escape. Lot did not lose everything in the destruction of his city without first being told to leave. The people of Nineveh did not face judgment without first receiving a message they could respond to. In every case, the warning was not the end. It was the invitation. The space between the warning and the consequence was a window, and every person inside that window had a choice. Take it seriously, or ignore it. Most people ignored it. Not because they were evil, not because they were stupid, because normal life is very loud, and warnings are easy to file away as something to think about later, until later arrives and the window is no longer open. This is the pattern Scripture repeats, with consistent regularity, not to frighten people into faith, but to make clear that faith has a timeline, that the offer of grace does not remain open indefinitely, that there is a moment, described across multiple books of the Bible, when the invitation is complete, and what comes next is no longer mercy, but accountability. Most people in the Western world have heard some version of this message before. Many grew up hearing it in church. Some walked away from it at some point in their lives, for reasons that made sense at the time. Others have held on to it quietly, not quite sure what to do with it. And some are hearing it for the first time. Wherever a person lands on that spectrum, the response being called for is the same. Not a feeling, not an emotion stirred by dramatic imagery, a genuine, considered, personal reckoning with what is true. Because the events in Jerusalem are not asking anyone to feel something. They are asking everyone to think, to look honestly at the world as it currently exists, to compare what is being seen globally with what was written thousands of years ago, and to ask, without the noise of daily life drowning it out, what that comparison means for how to live right now. The book of 2 Peter contains a warning specifically addressed to people who would dismiss the idea that time is running out. It says scoffers will come in the last days, saying, "Where is the promise of his coming? Everything continues as it always has." That dismissal is not unique to any century. It is the default response of every generation that has lived in relatively stable conditions. Things have always continued, therefore they will always continue. But 2 Peter's response to that dismissal is direct. The fact that things have continued is not evidence that the promise has failed. It is evidence of patience. God is not slow in keeping his promise. He is patient, not wanting anyone to perish, but wanting everyone to come to a change of mind. That phrase, a change of mind, is worth sitting with. Because what is being called for is not religious performance. It is not attendance at a particular building. It is not the adoption of a specific political position. It is a change in what a person fundamentally believes about who holds authority over their life. and what happens when this life ends. That is a deeply personal thing, and it cannot be forced on anyone, but it can be invited. And this is the invitation. Look at what is happening in Jerusalem. Look at what is happening in the world. Look at the pattern. Look at what was written before any of it began. And then look at your own life. Not with guilt, not with shame, with honesty. Ask what you actually believe. Ask whether the life being built reflects those beliefs. Ask whether there is anything being carried that needs to be laid down before the weight of it becomes permanent. Because the door is still open. That is the message underneath every crack in the Golden Gate, every sound in the Jerusalem sky, every sealed jar pulled from dry ground, every word carved into ancient stone. The door is still open, but every door that has ever mattered in Scripture eventually closed. And when it closed, it did not reopen. The invitation being extended right now, in this moment, is the same one that has always been at the center of the biblical message. Come. Not when everything is figured out, not when life is more stable, not when there is more time. Now, while the window is still there, while the door is still open, while the pattern is still building rather than complete. Because once it is complete, the season of invitation ends, and what has been sealed in mercy becomes sealed in judgment. The choice has always been the same, and it has never been more urgent than it is right now. But there is one more thing, something that has not been mentioned yet, something that changes the entire conversation about the Golden Gate, the sealed chambers, the sounds, and the lights. Something that was reportedly found, just recently, in a location that has been watched for decades by researchers who believed it held a specific and irreplaceable piece of history. And what was found there, if the reports are accurate, suggests that the timeline may be much shorter than anyone has publicly acknowledged. For decades, a specific location near Jerusalem has been monitored quietly, not by governments, not by major archaeological institutions, by a small group of researchers who believed, based on a combination of historical records, ancient texts, and subsurface analysis, that something was still buried there, something that the biblical record describes as having been hidden, deliberately, in a time of great national crisis, with the intention that it would remain hidden until the right moment. They have been watching that location for years, and last month, the readings changed. Not dramatically, not in a way that would make headlines, but in a way that the people watching it recognized immediately. Something beneath the surface had shifted. A space that had previously shown consistent readings suddenly registered differently, as if something inside it had moved, or as if something from outside it had finally reached it. The team has not released a public statement. Access to the site has been quietly restricted, and the two researchers who have spoken informally about what the new readings suggest have both used the same phrase to describe it. Not in our lifetime. That is what they expected. That is what they built their careers around. Not in our lifetime. And now they are not saying that anymore. What changed beneath that location? What the new readings actually show? And what it means for the timeline that prophecy watchers have been studying for generations? That is a story that is still unfolding. And it begins exactly where this one ends. Beneath the stones of Jerusalem, in the dark, where something sealed for a very long time is no longer staying still.